Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to the James Bond Complex podcast, the podcast where we discuss, rejoice, and analyze in the James Bond phenomenon in all its shapes and forms, from Fleming to films and everything in between. Ooh. I'm one of your hosts. My name's Edgar.
I'm Matt. I'm also one of the hosts.
Excellent. Matt, did you take a look? I think it was earlier this week. Universal released like a No Time to Die image. It's like Daniel Craig in Jamaica, sort of looking at the camera with a gun in his hand. Did you see that?
I saw that.
Yeah, it's like marketing for that movie we're getting in like 5 years from now.
The 60th anniversary film. You mean?
Right, exactly. 2 years from now. I'm exaggerating. Marketing. It's a big thing. We'd like to think we know a little bit about the marketing of Bond, but judging by the homework I've been doing for 48 hours, I don't know all. So we figured maybe it's a topic that we'd like to broach.
Yes.
Maybe get a little bit of help, assistance to get the ball rolling for what might be a new series, TBD. So we thought of a guy. Who did we think of?
It's some guy. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Right.
I'm struggling with the name. It starts with Diego
Zaritsky, something like that. I don't remember.
Diego Zaritsky.
Oh, close. No, it is the one, the only David Zaritsky from the Bond Experience. David, good morning and welcome to the James Bond Complex.
Good morning, and thanks for having me, Jensen. Boy, you didn't butcher my name at all. What a smooth transition.
The worst part is I have it written down line by line, but it's written in just so many different ways.
Phonetically.
And by the way, as a longtime listener of your show, and I love your show. I mean, that's why, first of all, I was looking forward to chatting about this subject for hours on end with you guys, because I do enjoy you guys regardless of what we talk about. But I really thought that opening that you guys have is pre-recorded, and now to watch Edgar do it live, you do that new every single time. That's crazy.
Yeah, we trade off. Sometimes it's me, sometimes what you heard before the listeners just heard this. Oh, Matt, me or you? That's basically what we do every time. And it's either Matt or me.
I love it. So organic.
So, David, obviously, we've given away some of the spoilers. It's the brands of Bond, the marketing of Bond, more specifically. Although we obviously will be talking about brands. You're the guest for this episode for a few specific reasons. A, you're a Bond fan, and B, I know professionally and personally for enjoyment, branding and marketing is a big thing in your life. So, as we get the ball rolling here, could you maybe speak to us a little about, how does Bond factor in your life and why branding and marketing?
Yeah, sure. First we'll start out with, like you said, my vocation, my day-to-day is I have the honor of being a leader of a pharmaceutical marketing and advertising company. And it's a wonderful group of people that work in the pharmaceutical industry to market pharmaceutical brands. There's nothing more complicated than that. And our approach in my company is really storytelling. It's this, whether it's a commercial for 30 seconds, if it's an ad on a page, if it's a conversation with your doctor to you as a patient, everything has a certain feature and benefit. Everything has a certain value proposition. But more importantly, every time, whether it's pharmaceuticals or clothing, every time somebody tells a story, what happens is somebody either imagines themselves in that story or they don't. And it's the difference between successful marketing and not successful marketing. And people tend to complicate it. They write big books about it and they, charge a lot of money to teach it, but it is pretty simple. Dovetail that into the fact that I love the Bond franchise. So very early on in my early 30s, when I started truly collecting James Bond in a dedicated way, I focused a lot on the brands and marketing because it was in my blood. It was part of what I did for a living. Danielle, my wife, jokes that the only thing I remember from my childhood are jingles, but I know every jingle that I watched on Saturday morning cartoons while watching Justice League and Super Friends. I can tell you those jingles and sing them perfectly to key, like better than Barry Manilow. So this is a very natural discussion. And then my YouTube, when I started talking about clothing, I think people thought, oh, he loves style and he loves brands. Yes, but I love marketing even more. I love, the pitfalls. I love the trials and tribulations. I love the mistakes. I love the successes that they have. And Bond is so interesting because, to your point, and I think part of this conversation is from 1962 to right now, 2021, that we're doing this, things have changed. And that change is interesting.
Yeah, we're definitely going to, we'll definitely see how it changed. It's quite impressive.
It was fun rewatching all those old trailers, watching some of the looking at posters to sort of identify the what the marketing campaign was trying to put the accents on from each movie, going from 62 to today. It has changed a lot. At the same time, there are some basic elements that are right there from the beginning. It is impressive. Like for as a franchise, it almost came fully formed from the get-go. From Doctor No on, it's like Doctor No is a solid foundation base. They say in the documentary that it's one of the best marketing campaigns that they had, and looking at it from marketing perspective, I was surprised how much of it is right there. It hasn't changed. Like, you get Bond in tuxedo, the 007 logo, the girls, it's right there and there, and it's still, to this day, it's still part of the marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things about Dr. No, and people can go on YouTube and see exactly what Mathieu was talking about, but one of the things that's interesting is back then, in the 60s, in the early 60s, they believed that the marketing campaign with trailers was to basically give you a smaller version of the movie, which means they would actually show the ending of these movies. You would see the fight, and the things with Dr. No. And we know, as Bond fans, in the movie itself, you don't see Dr. No until kind of the end of the movie. So, in showing those different things, first of all, it had to be bombastic. It had to capture their attention, because it's not like movie trailers were really shown on TV that much, if at all, quite frankly. TV back then was sponsored by, cigarette ads and food ads and, not much more, gas, like Texaco and things like that. So you saw these trailers in the theater. And what people don't realize is when you went to the theater back in the 60s, sometimes trailers would last, well, sometimes they do nowadays, for, 45 minutes. They would be their own tiny little movie. So it wasn't that they would see the Dr. No and then start their movie. They would see, 10 different trailers back to back, almost as one movie. So they knew they had to capture your attention and excitement, and you may not go back to the movies for months on end. So it had to be loud and bombastic, Bond, 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 bang, 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 women, girls, guns, and, like all this, like it had to be so much input that, color, sound, and everything else. As a designer, Mathieu, I'm sure you can appreciate it.
I definitely did. One thing that fascinated me with that trailer is that it doesn't have one narration; it has two. So that they're sort of marketing the movie itself, but they're also building the Bond brand, because Bond talks like it's. And it made me think maybe they had an idea of doing a narration for the movie at one point, because it feels like the character is talking to the audience, and it feels like it could have been part of the movie at one point. I was like, oh, that's really weird. And they put Fleming's name. Fleming's name is part of the marketing, which makes me also think that the marketing for Bond really started with Kennedy and Playboy, because they started like the two entities sort of introduced the concept of Bond to mass audience before the movie, years before.
Here in the States, for example, the Bond comics were actually a little bit more popular than the books. And then that ushered in a lot of the books. And then they took the books and they actually, when the earlier Bond films became popular, they would literally slap the pictures from the movie on top of the book. So they would try to tie comics, books, and movie all together. And this is a bit of maybe a process discussion with marketing in general, but one thing that's consistent between the 60s and 2021 is that the franchise has what's called a marketing strategy, and it's usually international, global, if you will.
Mm.
And one of the things in the marketing strategy is how they're going to promote this and how theaters back then were to promote this. So this is to all you young children out there. They didn't have posters, or they did, but they were folded with lots of lines on them. They had what's called lobby cards that would fit in kind of a standard envelope. And, you know, you had to put the lobby cards up, but they would literally change the colors from the film in the lobby cards to attract attention. So blues were reds because red would attract the eye when you walked by them. There was a marketing strategy behind everything that they did.
All right, that explains the poster that's on the other brown shorts right now.
Yes.
Dr. No.
Yeah, there was a technique, and I'm not going to start pretending that I know this stuff a great deal, but in the 50 posters of Bond book that I have, hand tinted lobby cards and hand tinted posters. So I guess these would be sort of black and white images, and sort of like a coloring book, but much more professionally done. These be black and white images, and they would add color, and not, as you were alluding to, David, not necessarily the color expressed in the film themselves, like the Olar bar, or as we say, or our round shorts that we saw a couple of years ago. Doesn't mean they're not awesome. You know, the 50 years book exemplifies those lobby cards beautifully. They're absolutely stunning, but it is a little bit curious to like, that's not what he's wearing on the beach in Jamaica.
Yeah, we kill it because of that. I'll tell you, and again, I'll throw these little terms in, but I won't dwell on it. And Mathieu probably knows this, but that's called negative space. It's a behavioral science thing where you take things and you almost take the color out, except for those things that you want people to walk away with, or what we call legs. And so, you know, From Russia with Love did this so well, where the title, you know, and Sean Connery's name is in red and everything else is in this sepia, you know, this kind of beigeish type of look with some grays. And you wanted to give that kind of coldness, you know, From Russia with Love, because it was the Cold War, and you wanted to create this theme, but you know, you wanted them to walk away with the title and share that title. So shareability, telling other people about something and spreading that news, has not changed from the 60s. It's the same today. It's all about that shareability aspect.
Fascinating. And I like what you brought up, Matthew, about Fleming's name appearing fairly regularly, both on the posters and in the trailers, the theatrical trailer. And I guess that makes sense because Dr. No, they're trying to find that balance between, and some of these posters say the first James Bond film, so they're fairly confident about all the chips are in. It's the first one. There's more. You know, here's James Bond. And the trailers are actually quite descriptive of who James Bond is, most notably with the one narrated by Sean Connery. But the trailers and the posters also emphasize that it's inspired or based off of Fleming's, you know, best-selling novels, going back to the Kennedy point you brought up, Matthew. So there's, and it's not that Fleming's name never appears again. We'll get to Majesties in a few moments, and that's an interesting campaign. But certainly with this first one, because unless you've read the comics, unless you know the books, and nobody really knows Connery, he showed up like in a movie or two, you sort of have to do this balance. This is a movie, fingers crossed it's a movie series, and it's based on this, we promise you guys, it's based on this super popular book series. This is going to be great. Just
yeah. But Edgar, you got a great point, because what I've noticed in kind of studying this for years is that the first two Bond movies, Dr. No and From Russia with Love, tends to focus on knowing that the audience may not know Fleming, certainly Connery or Bond or the comics or the Playboy excerpts or anything like that, but they know that they want to escape to exotic locations. They know that beautiful women may be an escape for them. They know that danger and intrigue in a very boring, you know, sepia life is something that they want. So they focus on that, saying, we promise you for a few hours, you're going to be able to escape from that. Nowadays, and I keep making kind of the comparisons, I'm sure we'll do it all along, is, you know, it's almost like a given. Yeah, you're going to take me to locations. Yeah, you better have 16 explosions. So it's like now we want to see something different, and the bar is raised. But back in the 60s, that's kind of all we wanted. We just put me into an air conditioning box, give me something crunchy to eat, and take me away for a couple hours because life is kind of meh. Oh, wait, that's kind of now. Never mind.
they they do put the accent on the strange adventure. Oh, exotic location. Jamaica gets a shout out. Some of the actors also get their title card. Connery gets his name written. Joseph Wiseman, Ursula Andress, and I love the narrations. Like, Honey Rider. Oh, she's pretty. Oh, and all the sort of and you must I'm trying to see it from a 1960s perspective. You see things in London, you see things in Jamaica, you see a guy fighting somebody in a pool. It's bizarre. I'm trying to picture me in 1962. I'm trying to put myself in that mindset. It's an introduction to a world that, as we say, Edgar and I all the time, it's sort of like the real world, but a little bit on drugs.
Oh, wow, on drugs. Okay. Confession, Matt.
No.
Well, I will say we should take a moment as three Bond fans talking and everybody listening to bask in the absolute innocence. When they were marketing Dr. No, they had no idea this was going to be a marketing and merchandising juggernaut. So for Dr. No, Sears and Gilbert, and they didn't have a gajillion toys or commercials and products and things like we have now, where you can't turn left and see a Heineken ad. That's a wonderful innocence right through From Russia with Love until they knew they had a second success and said, holy cow, there is going to be a series of these. Maybe people want to live this lifestyle outside of the 2 hours that you're watching this movie. So I love looking at that total innocence of, maybe we'll have a book, associated with it. That's it.
Yeah. No, doing some what research time afforded, but yeah, certainly Dr. No of the movies we're going to go through drive by. Yeah, Dr. No is definitely the one where there's there's not a whole lot of material. I went to Ruben's website, toysofbond.co.uk, and like there isn't exactly a plethora of Dr. No material on his website, and he's like borderline scholar about man. Yeah, exactly. So if he didn't find very much, it's probably because there wasn't very much. I do like the point about the innocence, David, and the minute you said that, I don't know why, but I thought of the poster. I believe it's it's not the UK quad. It's I think it is the UK quad, where you have Connery and he's like winking in the poster. He has his gun. It's like no Bond movie did that, but it's very cute. It's very clever, and yeah, I guess there's a bit of a devil may care attitude about that marketing campaign. It's like, well, we don't, the first Bond movie, we'll see about that.
You know what? I have to go and check that out. I'm sure it exists. I don't know if I've ever seen it, but I like it because it breaks down that fourth wall and it's speaking to the audience. I mean, that's what it's doing. Exactly. It's like, we're about to have fun. It's like the whole Eddie Murphy thing.
Absolutely. I think there's the French poster where he's in the same pose, but he, French New Wave and this and that. He looks a little bit more serious. But the British, and I believe certainly the British, maybe not the American version, but there's a subtle little, he's sort of going like, check these girls, and obviously there's like the row of girls, next to him. So it's like, we're gonna have some fun here.
The promise of things to come. Excuse the pun.
Absolutely.
As you said, there's a innocence to that marketing campaign. It's, I'm going to bring up a little bit of Star Wars, but it is a little bit like the original Star Wars, where it's almost a space trucker movie. It's not tied to any like mythology, universe. It's just very basic story. And Dr. No it's beautiful and it's in its simplicity. And that's it's one of my go-to movies for that. But the marketing is just He's gonna go to Jamaica. He's gonna meet the babes. He's gonna fight the guy with the robot hands. He's gonna go to some weird sets. You're gonna have a good time. Boom.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Matthew, the Star Wars analogy is great for two reasons. Number one, when Star Wars first came out, they went to this tiny convention called San Diego Comic-Con, which was very tiny back then. They had a couple slides and they had a Marvel comic book, and that was it. And what happened was, very much like James Bond, they found out it was a juggernaut. It was an explosive thing. So they actually, the first toys, they were kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul and taking existing toys and turning them into, Star Wars toys quickly. Same thing happened with James Bond. If you look at some of the toys, even on Ruben's page, they would take a lot of existing pieces and try to fabricate them into something James Bond, little, even for Thunderball, they took aquatic stuff and, kind of turned it around and slapped a label on it, as opposed to today where everything has that, uniqueness to it. It has to be perfectly done specifically for Bond and go through trails and trails of filters to pass muster. But that's a discussion for a different time.
Yeah, no, the way it's done. I mean, we'll get to Skyfall and No Time to Die, which are a couple of the movies we have on the list here. But yeah, it's done very differently today. Are there anything? Our next movie would be Thunderball, but is there any? And Thunderball is an interesting one. Boom, nuclear bomb. But is there anything about Doctor No that we might want to broach?
No, but I'll say this. I believe in my study of this over the years, Goldfinger was kind of the movie that cemented it for the franchise and said, all right, we need to sit down and we need to think bigger and better. And this was part marketing discussion, part merchandising discussion, and part audience discussion. And I think during the Goldfinger time is that spy craze outside the theater hit a crescendo. So kids were able to buy, pajamas and clothing and, Gilbert, Sears toys and figures and all these types of things and live Bond in between the movies. Now, they were lucky. In between was a year. Remember those days? As opposed to a decade like us. So they didn't have too much in between. But what was interesting back then, we've got to acknowledge, their marketing strategy, that terminology again, was family oriented. So what I loved about looking at the ads back then is the commercials for kids of firing guns, because you could have commercials with guns and kids and grenades and things blowing up and pens exploding, no problem. But then they would also have ads for dads of those kids where the aftershave kills your woman, like James Bond. And literally there was an aftershave ad in Esquire that said, kill your Bond girl, which was
licensed to kill women. Like I remember, like I have this list of commercials for stuff from 1960s to today, and I remember seeing like it's a cologne, so licensed to kill.
It was the Mad Men era. So by the time, because I know we're dovetailing, we're swimming in to Thunderball. By the time they got to Thunderball, I mean, the marketing engine was at full blast. I mean, they knew what they had. And so that's why Thunderball, I think a part of it being, yes, it was the next movie to film, but the locations, the women, the bathing suits, Bond himself was dialed up to an 11.
Yeah, there's definitely the franchise now recognizes its own what's that word? Iconicity, iconography. It's now it's self-aware. There's a self-awareness about the campaign. While remaining classy, while remaining spectacular and very colorful. As far as poster campaigns are concerned, Thunderball is fighting for the number one spot for me.
Robert McGinnis litters my office here. He was one of the top poster artists of that time.
He's great. He has what's his name? The guy, he has an art style similar to the guy who did Conan artwork, and his name escapes me, but it's very Eric fantasy based, and it's gorgeous. I love the posters for that. And you see sort of the three ideas that they're selling. You have Bond and Gadgets, Bun in action, and bun with the ladies. These are the three things they're selling you.
You had me at hello.
Yeah, and the marketing really grabs you. This is also on, as on the posters, but also on the trailers that I was watching last night. Is the look up, look down, look out, exclamation marks. Like the tagline. Like this is a movie that has a tagline. I think Goldfinger has everything he touches turns to excitement. I want to believe. I didn't study the
Something
marketing.
like that, yeah.
007 spells Bond.
Yes.
So it was educational as well. Well, one of the things that I think Thunderball did incredibly well was, they took the whole idea of, in Goldfinger, you have brands. So brands are associated in Goldfinger. You've got a lot of drinking brands and things associated with that. But Thunderball was the one where brands, I believe, came to Bond. So even Voight, Voight, who does scuba gear and things like that, they wound up making not only snorkeling with boxes and branding that you would see in stores, but they also had Voight items in the movie theater itself. So you could actually get, they had and I have it downstairs, they had a Voight snorkel, and it had 007 on it in the package, Thunderball packaging, and it was a squirt gun too. So you could turn it over and squirt it. Now, every kid wanted one of those, but it also had the Voight name. So Voight was this kind of well-known brand for scuba divers and snorkelers. But as you can imagine, like brands today that get associated with Bond, excuse the pun, all ships rose. And so Voight became this juggernaut in and of itself for decades afterwards because of that Bond association. That was just one example of that.
It's interesting you bring up the Voight example. I think I saw that on Ruba. It's somewhere in my Thunderball notes, the water gun snorkeler hose, not hose, but breather, if you will. I was reading one of maybe my favorite book, although it ends with Die Another Day, is The Bond Legacy from John Cork and somebody else. And I was reading the section on Thunderball. I think, Matt, I showed you a little video. I took a little video of what I was reading yesterday. Mind-boggling. I don't know if they do it these days. Eon a little bit. They keep it close to the vest these days, but it's July 1965, so they're still working on the movie, probably post-production. And in London, there's this meeting at the end of July 1965. There's this meeting between Eon and like an army of companies. And they sort of say, this is what the movie's about. Here's some clips. Make us some products. Like that's insane. And companies would like line up to associate themselves with James Bond. I mean, it goes to show. When I read that, I was unaware of that. When I read that paragraph, I was like, yeah, like Thunderball. It started with Goldfinger, but Thunderball, it's like, if they're knocking on your door, like, can we make a James Bond product, please? It's like, you've won.
And like, Wonder Bread and things like that. So Goldfinger, this is a term we're going to be talking about actually quite a bit, I think, in the remainder of the conversations, because Goldfinger started a tradition that continues to today, and that is creating what some product and brand companies have actually called the Bond Bible. It's actually called the marketing strategy, as I was calling it before, but it's usually a multi-page, it's like the Skyfall one is 35 pages long. And it's basically all the details that a brand gets about what they can and can't do. Now, they still need to pass muster and go through a filter, but these are basic tenets of James Bond. For example, and I've got some of the older ones, and I have every one of the new ones. And what's interesting is it says there, for example, it tells distributors and theaters what they can't and can do. So they would put out newspaper ads, right? Local theaters would put newspaper ads. Well, you can't do this and you can't do that. You can't have Bond in this situation. You can't show Bond as a comical figure, or you can't show, there were ones like in the 90s where you can't show Bond smoking, or you can't tie it into a smoking ad or anything like that. So it's rules, regulations, parameters, and marketing restrictions. Sears, when Sears first started marketing their toys, they were mandated to have it at what's called eye level. Now, it was at a child eye level. So it had to be 2.5 to 3 feet off the ground, not 5 to 6 feet from mom and dad. Why? Because you wanted the child to be like, Mom, Dad, that's all I want for Christmas. And pull them down. And then, of course, mom and dad would look down. So, not every mom and dad in the 1960s wanted their 8-year-old kid to have a misogynistic assassin as their hero and their toy under the Christmas tree with Christ looking down. So my point being is that the marketing strategy started very early and it was very purposeful.
And they're very protective of their brand, which it's, I think it's because it's owned by at the time it was owned by two families, but because it's more or less family owned, they're very protective of their brand. When you see other IPs that are owned by conglomerates or studios, they're not that careful. They're gonna slap a logo on anything from underwear to I don't know what is
candies. Well, mind you, Bond. I shouldn't
fruits.
say candy. Bond
I saw
fruits, fruits,
I saw Star Wars fruits at one point.
Yeah.
Or Toy Story.
Yeah,
bananas.
stickers on the bananas. Star Wars stickers on the bananas. I remember that.
Bond wouldn't do that. They wouldn't allow their brand.
A Bond banana might be misconstrued. That would be just.
Oh, but it's such a missed opportunity, though. Oh.
But they have products that they might have sold cigarettes back in the 60s, but today, of course, they're not going to do that. They do sell alcoholic beverages, cocktails and stuff like that, but it's mostly for adults. The brand is less targets less children today than it did back then.
100%. And I'm sure we'll talk about that evolution, but you can almost see it. And I don't mean to jump ahead, but you can almost see the turning point when that happened and with who that happened. And then, even there was an attempt, which we'll talk about later with Brosnan, to get back into, that market, which didn't quite take. And we'll talk about maybe why.
No, it's interesting. I know we have a lot to talk about, but I was completely oblivious about this Bond Bible. Like, you're blowing my mind, Dave. And you're saying you have copies of these things?
Yeah, a lot of it is it's mostly for historical and educational. And as a marketer, one of the things I've studied is the Bond franchise. What kind of experiences have they created, and as one of the most, as you say, protected brands by the brand itself. I was always very curious about how do they go about creating a relationship with a brand? What do they tell them? What kind of experience do they create? And it has changed over the years, and we'll talk a little bit about that. It's no great secret, if you will, about how they do it. It's not, proprietary. Many brands do what they do. But I found it very interesting to study. For example, most distributors and most film companies, most franchises like Marvel, they have Bibles. They have things that they tell the theaters, they can and can't do, and, how long a poster can stay up, and, things like when dates change, which we're all very familiar with, how those things need to be destroyed. And people are like, you're going to destroy them? I mean, Bond fans are just horrified, but that is a very important marketing strategy to, not create confusion, to create a very clear path. And that's a corporate decision. It's not a mean or a maniacal decision, but it's not a greedy decision. It's a marketing decision.
Yeah, there is a bit of and that's where, ergo, I'd be terrible at marketing. I'm too much in line with the artistry and the romanticism involved with marketing. Like, I remember seeing your video. This goes back a little while. Where you got your video that explains why whenever you talk about No Time to Die, you have the big like that massive standee behind you. And I was like, I would never be able to pull that off, but that's brilliant. And it's brilliant because, well, A, it's a fantastic standee. But B, they're just going to chuck that to the curb or whatever, or burn it. Like, it's still a piece of art, so to speak. That's where I like the marketing.
Yeah.
But
that's why
I
Ruben, that's why, sorry, Edgar, I didn't mean to cut you off, but Ruben, you called him out before. Ruben, I see as much more than a collector. And I know he's, he calls himself a collector, and I don't think it does him justice. He's an archivist.
Yeah.
Archives things that have been lost to time, and we don't know they exist. I mean, this conversation uncovered, these discussions of these marketing strategy on Bible books to you. You're going to want to know more, I'm sure, over time, off and on this meeting. But it's really important for us not to forget this, because the journey to Bond is not just about making a movie. It's about making a franchise. And the marketing is such an interesting part of that.
Absolutely. And
Sounds like a tagline.
artistry. Hey, you're the marketer of us three. You're the marketer, so why not? Might as well come from you. But and I'm sure, Matt, I like I like the artistry and the romanticism about it. I don't do anything related to art. You, Matt, actually do some things related to art, so I'm sure you can appreciate like this. It's like,
I'm always amazed at the IP owners, the Broccolis now, and even the salesmen back then, that they are able to take those elements, the basic core elements of Bond, and sort of recycle them and give them a little bit more flavor of the film itself that they're trying to sell. For Thunderball, they have the jetpack, they have the underwater, they have the ladies, but the next movie, well, it's Connery. They're selling that Connery is James Bond. In the following movie, which I'm going to talk about later, I have a poster on my wall. You just see the corner of that, signed by George, by the way. They're selling the action, not as much the actor that's playing James Bond. So they're always sort of recycling the ideas, but put them into new lens, a new filter to highlight certain aspects of the movie that they're selling at the time. I'm actually always amazed by that.
We are very fortunate to have you on, Matthew, because you bring a very unique perspective to this conversation. And that is, you brought up the point of selling. Posters have the difficult job of selling an experience that is going to be moving. So it's selling a movie. And I remember when you were doing Snowfall, Operation Snowfall. And I remember when you did my poster for Operation Gatherall. And you made a point, what we do is we do a creative brief, so as the artist and the creative designer and the visionary that Matthew is, he asks certain questions like, what are the key components? Just like he said here, just like the Bond franchise, they do the same exact thing. They sit around with their creatives like Matthew, and they go, what are the key components that are going to put butts in seats, or get people to Newtown, Pennsylvania, or get people to Toronto? Is it the tower? Is it Bond looking at it? Is it snow? Why, yes, it is. Is it the people that are going to be at Gatherall? Is that what's going to bring people? Why, yes, it is. And that's what Matthew took and turned it into a still colored image. That's all it is. That's all. There's nothing dimensional. It doesn't talk to you. And yet it speaks to the experience that people can imagine. That's a hard job. So what you do, to me, is exactly what the Bond franchise does so well.
They distillate an idea to its simplest form.
Yeah, you've showed me, Matt, because I know you'll correct me if I'm wrong. Obviously, it's your business, but I know you'll write sort of personal articles, your pillars. I think you call them your pillars, your 3 pillars of those. So I've read some of those. You've shared some of those with me, and I've read them and going like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, and that's where that came from.
Always, it's something I learned in university, and it's something that I used to do stuff that's a little bit more like jazz. I'm just gonna put a guy in a tuxedo when I did my posters. But since then, I've really it forced me to really think and analyze my design before I put pen to paper. I try to think, okay, what's the idea that I'm selling? And when I'm looking at posters, especially the older ones, I just see brilliance in their design, in the not just the way that they look. Like it's the composition of them, and sometimes the taglines.
Yeah.
Here comes the biggest ball of all.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you're describing, Matthew, is a source of confusion because, and I know we want to go in chronological order, but we can't help but make a comparison to today. And so when we saw the No Time to Die poster come out with Bond in a tuxedo and he was kind of pursing his lips, but he was sort of turning and not turning, and there wasn't really anything there other than the title, we all kind of scratched our heads, even people not like Matthew and I that have this in our vocational background. But somebody had to sit down and do a creative brief. Somebody had to show version 1, version 2, version 3 with something called track changes the whole time of we don't like this, we don't like that, change this, go for that. Decisions had to be made. It's almost seemed like that was for they forego that, a little bit. But of course they must have done it. So what the professionals in us do is we start to think about and put ourselves in their shoes and go, what was the thinking behind something like that versus a Thunderball poster?
Yeah. Well, go ahead, man.
So honestly, sometimes I feel like things slip through because you see that poster, the first poster, you see elements of it in poster they've done later. The one that's in your basement, the standee, like the blue background. Obviously, that comes from that original poster. It feels, it's bizarre, man. The No Time to Die. That first poster is not my favorite one, but I see what they were going for. The blue background, the silhouette, but it was.
Well, all right, so let's go back a little bit. In the Connery era, even though Connery certainly by Goldfinger and absolutely by Thunderball, of course, was a superstar, global superstar. And yes, his name was as big as the titles. But it clearly, with No Time to Die, they're using Daniel Craig to sell the movie, and almost only Daniel Craig. I mean, they're not having, Bond as a character so much selling a movie. It's got to be Daniel Craig. That's the only conclusion that I could come, that it's Daniel Craig's James Bond, if you will, in kind of focusing on that.
But what's weird about that is, you know what, you're 100% right. His name is not mentioned in any of the marketing. You don't see Daniel Craig is, you don't hear Daniel Craig is James Bond. Even the poster that you have, I'm pretty sure it doesn't say, like, he doesn't have the name above the title. They put his face on, but his name is not mentioned in the marketing. I'm sorry, at all. Compared to Thunderball, Connery's name's above the title. And that's a big thing for in Star's contract. And I remember, like, I watched the Die on the Day poster. It's Pierce Brosnan is James Bond. Daniel Craig has been doing this for like 16, 20 years now, and he never used
30, 35.
Something like that.
Like it.
And they never put his name above the title. His name is never mentioned in the marketing, in the trailers. Never, Daniel Craig is back as James Bond. But at the same time, his face is all over the marketing. You see you saw a bus ad for the watch downtown Montreal, and it's Daniel Craig's face.
Yeah.
The poster it's Daniel Craig's face. Every poster that he's done, like, it's just his face. Like the Skyfall poster, just Daniel Craig walking. But it's bizarre. I must say there's something bizarre about the marketing of Daniel Craig as James Bond. I'm sorry. I sort of
no, it's not worse. Well, speaking of maybe to trot onwards, we'll get back. Obviously, we'll get back to Craig later on this morning. But we briefly alluded to a marketing campaign that greatly emphasizes the star without naming him. How about a marketing? How about a marketing campaign where they're really not sure what to do with the star, which is on Her Majesty's Secret Service?
Oh, yes.
This was an interesting one to study. I put study in quotation marks, but trailers, posters, and I have the Charles Helfenstein book, The Making of Her Majesty's Secret Service, and I read the marketing chapter on that. That sounded like it was a challenge based on
Well,
what happened behind the scenes.
yes, and the most amazing thing is the initial posters for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, blocked out Lazenby's face. It had this kind of dark shadow over it because you were kind of like, guess who the new Bond is going to be, and so they had to focus. And we talk about the opposite of today. They had to focus on the different aspects of Bond, and slightly later when they showed Bond skiing, with the girl in the background and everybody chasing, was all about action and snow and ice, and again back to that exotic location and peril, constant peril, which was smart because you think about the time, and you always have to do this, the time and what was happening politically and globally in the world at that time. This was perfect because, those moments of escape, I think overshadowed even who was playing James Bond, and that it wasn't Sean Connery anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Lazenby's name is certainly not above the title. Matt, I mean, the poster's right next to you, but I believe, when they start naming the credits at the bottom, his name is first.
Sure.
But if you're not accustomed to movie posters and studying them, you do have to look around to see, well, where's George Lazenby's name on this poster? Is he James Bond? Yes, he is. It's right down there in the fine print.
Yeah.
On the poster itself, like he's dressed in the tuxedo, and the way they combed his hair, the way they dress him up, he looks like Connery, and it's only his face, which is, I don't know, man, like a 1/30th of the poster. It's when you look closely, it's not Connery, but it kind of looks like him. Yeah. If you're not too careful, you might not notice.
Yeah. And I think the marketing strategy, and I don't know anything factual about this, but if I was in the room, I would imagine it was, we've got to make people so comfortable, and this has got to seem so familiar that they're like, I'm attending a Bond movie. In fact, I think there's lore or theory or legend that, one of the directors said, it doesn't matter who you have as Bond, as long as it's a Bond film, which, you can argue that point, of course. But I think even in the titles, the opening titles of that film is showing excerpts from the Sean Connery's movies. So it's really to lull you into the, no, don't leave. It's okay. Look, it's your favorites. It's your favorites. And then he's taking out the gadgets in the office and you hear the familiar music. I mean, it's all there.
The new Bond girl, the new, but it's the same. Don't worry, don't we? Stay. It's the same. Stay.
Yeah.
I'm so happy you brought that up, Matthew, because I was watching the trailers last night, and like every Bond movie, we know them all by heart. But I don't exactly go back and watch Majesty's trailers on a weekly basis, so I hadn't seen them in a little bit. And I'm watching these trailers going like, the new Bond, if you think your girl's a looker, check out this guy's dolls and stuff like, wait a minute, but they spend the whole movie saying this is the same James Bond. Like, what's the message here? Like, it was such a strange, I guess when you watch the film, the title sequence, like you alluded to, David, and the scene where he's taking out his old gadgets later on, the movie, the finished product is reminding us that no, it's the same guy. The marketing literally says this is the new Bond. We're talking about the first time there was a new actor playing the role, so it's understandable that they might not have been 100% confident in how to broach this challenge. Clearly not, because trailer says new, movie says same guy. Okay. But an interesting challenge, a very interesting challenge.
Not every one of your audience, but probably many of them know that Lazenby was not asked to come on the press tour, and that he actually paid for himself to go on his own press tour because he didn't look like Bond when this all marketing hit. He looked a little bit like a cross between what I look like and Joe Darlington right now. So,
but not as handsome, Not nearly, please. Bond.
But the reality is that, I think they may have downplayed that. I mean, he didn't do the circuit. And they had the Bond girls do that. Many of the Bond girls going to the far reaches of the globe. So that's a quirky one, as far as talking about marketing. And I'm hard pressed to even think of a ton of marketing pieces and items that have really come out of that particular one.
Yeah, it was,
Yeah, I mean, no, go ahead, man.
I was looking at Ruben's, and even I went on thunderballs.org and I was like, there's not much that they like. It's like, well, we sell this thing. We have a movie. Come and see it, please.
It's a great poster, though. You know what? Honestly, it is a very, very beautiful poster.
Amazing.
I'm
it's awesome.
so glad I have that poster. And that's how I met Edgar, and I have Lazenby's signature, and I think he signs every poster at the same place for obvious reason. As a piece of marketing, it is strange. They have the red square with the title of the movie, James Bond 007. James Bond 007 gets above the title.
Well, maybe going back to the quote you quoted, David, is somebody. It might have been Cubby. I want to say it was Cubby. My gut is telling me it was Cubby, saying that the character is more important than the actor portraying that the character, and that might be Majesties, for all intents and purposes, might be the first film in which the marketing campaign had no choice but to reckon with that reality. A new actor, and everybody loved Connery, so this is going to be a bit of a challenge. Oh, by the way, this new actor's not doing the next one. He might be a bit of a douche. Oops, double challenge.
Let's emphasize only Bond.
So let's emphasize Bond. Let's stop emphasizing the character. And that who knows? Is that vestiges of that philosophy? Is that what plays into the Daniel Craig era? I don't have a clue. But anything else about Majesties that strikes our fancy?
As far as the marketing campaign?
Yeah, the marketing campaign.
Not really. I like it as a film.
It's a fantastic movie.
I'm more amused about the following film where it's he's back, we're back. Great movies. We heard forget you. About
The one. That one actually said in some of the older trailers, like the one, the only Sean Connery is James Bond. It's almost like, that last one, it was a bit of a mistake, but now we've corrected that mistake. It's like, all right, easy there, guy.
I know. It's, man, do I ever miss narration in trailers? We haven't talked a whole lot about narration, but all the ones we've talked about thus far have narration, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
It's perfect, especially the Bond ones.
I'm amazed. In fact, well, the Moonraker. Let's get into our Moonraker shuttles and shoot off here. But the Moonraker one and AFTAC, we'll get to AFTAC a little bit later on, but those are certainly the two where when I was watching those trailers, I was like, man, they keep finding new ways to say the same damn thing. Excitement, danger, girls, adventure. It's the same message, but somehow they're saying it differently every time.
I agree. And the interesting thing, and Matthew, this brings up your Star Wars thing. We know, of course we know that, Moonraker was a direct reaction to the success of Star Wars. You can see that in the marketing and you can see that in the merchandising. So from a marketing standpoint, there was so much emphasis on lasers and ships in space and excitement. And they still had, I think they did a great job actually in Moonraker, because I think they had to balance between the Bond fans saying, no, this is that Bond movie that you've known and loved since 1962. So it's like, take it easy, Dad. But, this isn't your dad's Bond movie. This is going to have cool lasers. Did you like Star Wars? Then you're going to love Moonraker. It had to have that. So this was one of the first times with a Bond movie that they packaged, little pogs and little things in Wonder Bread. and little, collectible cards for kids to trade on the school ground and on the playground and things. They had costumes. Ben Cooper costumes had a Jaws mask, which I have downstairs, and a Bond mask, and an astronaut suit that you could buy. And they had
Nice.
Wix had these little cap guns that looked just like the laser guns. And they had dolls. They had full dolls of Roger Moore that turned green over time. So don't ask me why.
I've
The
saw
plastic
those.
reaction. Yeah, but this was, you were surrounded. So by the time Moonraker came out, when you walked into your grocery store, or you walked into a shopping, well, there really wasn't so much malls, but a toy store, this is the true surround sound of marketing and merchandising. You couldn't turn around. You knew Moonraker was here. You heard the song playing over the airwaves. I mean, this was where the marketing engine said, we're not going to let you leave your house without you knowing that there's a Bond movie that you need to go to.
Yeah, I was not, that's before my time, but obviously you were around when that movie came out. And I was looking at the marketing and some of the things that on other documents they mentioned. There's a part of the movie where I think they passed through like 6 or 5 billboards of things that they promote through the movie.
Yes.
Among them, 7-Up. 7-Up is all over that movie. And I was looking if there was any product related to 7-Up, and I don't think, did they have any like bottles, like special James Bond? They did.
Yeah. So this is, and I spoke to Calvin Dyson when he and I did our Moonraker debate, where he was for it and I was against it. But we do talk about the marketing of this. And I actually show him a couple of trade papers. So in the Bond Bible for Moonraker, they actually sold branded Seikos that you see in the movie in the theater. So imagine seeing the theater coming out, and by the popcorn, there were racks like you would see in a shopping mall of Seiko watches that you could buy, exact replicas of them. And then contests. They had coloring books for kids in the theater. And I remember this so well because, let me tell you, I'm going to make you guys so jealous, you young pups. I saw Moonraker for the first time as about a 10-year-old at a friend's birthday party. About 6 of us were taken by his mother and father to the theater to see Moonraker, and it was part of his birthday party to do that. And when we came out, we all got Moonraker coloring books, and we went back to the party and colored Moonraker stuff. And I mean, but this is what it was all about. The brands, the things in the theater were often branded at this point. So you could get, those more branded Moonraker type things. Like I said, even like bread. Bread had the wrappers that was printed Moonraker on the side of it, that had the little trading cards inside and little foils, milk cartons, things like that. It's fascinating.
What was it? Was it in Toronto? Because we've been to Toronto like 3 or 4 times over the last like 3 or 4 years. Me and Matt for twice for James Bond concerts, once with you. One of those times, did we not go into like a toy store or a comic book store, and there was like this box of Moonraker like bubblegum stick?
Oh yes.
It was like the whole box was there. We didn't buy it because it's like, what am I going to do with this? But
I was tempted, but when there's stuff like that, Edgar usually says, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm gonna put it back because I have a tendency to, I must get it now. And I don't collect baseball cards anymore. But it was, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think the logo, the way they write Moonraker, as it's sort of the Star Wars. It has a pyramid shape. It's like Moonraker, and it's not the way they write the title Moonraker. It's different for the marketing. They have different logos. Star Wars, and sometimes it's just Moonraker written very plainly, and in the movie it's just.
See, as a designer, you're going to notice those types of things. I will say, and it's important to note for those of you kind of listening to this as a journey, this is a bit of a flip. So I mentioned in the 60s, you had, adults with libations, then you had adults and kids and family, right up to about, Connery. And then quite frankly, with Moonraker, obviously it swung heavily to children.
Oh, yeah.
And we talk about this a little bit. Jaws, for example, was such a kid favorite in The Spy Who Loved Me. They made him, kind of a happy-go-lucky guy. Here's to you, kid. But it was less about marketing to adults in Moonraker and much more family-oriented, and certainly even children at that point. And that will continue actually through the next couple of Roger Moore films as far as toys and merchandising.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch there, David. I was thinking about listening to both you and Matt wax poetic about the marketing campaign. It did strike me, especially since we keep bringing up Star Wars for the obvious reasons, the categorical reasons. Star Wars was a big hit for a lot of people. It produced toys. You were talking earlier, David, about non-Star Wars toys being repainted as Star Wars toys. Yeah. So obviously Star Wars is a big hit with the younglings. And here's Moonraker jumping off of Star Wars's popularity. Yeah, I was, like I said, you sort of took the words out of my mouth, but I was going to ask, I guess this is the movie, even though Thunderball had toys for children and Goldfinger had some toys for children. Star Wars Freudian slip. Moonraker just seems like, this is the money people at Eon are like, finally, this is the perfect movie for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. And it I think they continued with some of those aspects for the next couple of more ones, like, cap guns and things like that, where people could really dress up and pretend, kids to be James Bond. You have these wonderful accessory sets and things like that are just repurposed, and they worked.
The sunglasses, on Ruben's page, there's a pair of Roger Moore sunglasses with Roger's face with a pair of sunglasses. It is horribly beautiful. It is just, I want one of those just for my own personal collection. I'm like, somebody proved this. It just looks embarrassing. But
they're perfect.
It's it's beautifully, it's cringy and beautiful at the same time. I love it.
Yeah, a little shout out to Bollinger, because I just did a Bollinger video, but one of the things is they've got a pretty consistent marketing and merchandising presence in the Bond films, and it's purposeful and it's paid for. That's an important thing to talk about since we are talking about marketing. There are interesting situations where a brand might appear in a Bond film by happen chance. Somebody wants that piece of clothing, they think it'll look good on Bond, and they don't pay the designer for it. They just happen to acquire it. And it's a wonderful, wonderful happy accident for the brand. There's the 7-Up thing and the British Airways and Seiko and things like that they go through contracts, and there's a lot of specific engagement about how far that company can take the James Bond name and what they can do with it. And again, it gets back to that marketing strategy of what you can and can't do with them. So 7-Up, I'm sure, took advantage of that in Moonraker and all the way through. But there were certain things that even 7-Up couldn't do. So there are restrictions around protecting the franchise.
Absolutely. And we just want to take a quick moment for our listeners to remind them that 7-Up is a delicious, refreshing beverage. So,
do we have sponsorship for that?
The choice of Bond.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
But and the posters for Moonraker are quite fun as well. Again, we're not, and we're still a few years away from the I think License to Kill is where the Photoshoppy stuff starts to look a little bit awkward. We still have a few movies to go before License. We're not talking about License to Kill, but just as far as the trajectory of the overall marketing strategies go, we're still in that period where there's wonderful artistry that goes into the poster work. I love the UK quad. I love UK quads because I sort of like the slightly more panoramic style, and that great panoramic view of the space station with Bond in a spacesuit and Lois Childs not looking at all like she does in the movie, but very, very scantily clad.
Well, in similar positions to the Hildebrandt poster that made the Star Wars, movie so famous, where you've got them focusing the gun forward and Leia hanging off of his leg. It's almost exactly pose for pose. Instead of a Death Star, you have a space station.
Mm.
Which, mea culpa, it's totally fine. If it worked, over here, Hollywood still does that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I think I'm gonna have to find a print of it and put on my wall.
Yes,
It's
what are you
real.
doing?
I just got Dr. No here. That's waiting for a frame. Once we get the lift for the confinement, but it's beautiful. I had years ago. I bought VHS copies of all the films, and I had Moonraker, License to Kill, and View to a Kill. And I wore those tapes. They're already pretty worn out. It's by the time that they were flipping the VHS for DVDs. But I remember taking out the sleeve and just keeping the poster. I don't know what happened to all of them, but the Moonraker one was on my wall for the longest time, and it is that image that you described of more just shooting the camera. Ali Goodhead sort of leaning on him. Hugo Drax is in the background. I think Jaws also.
Jaws is like,
yeah, that's
who
great.
Who could ever forget that? It's like,
that's great. I love that.
And I love the potato foil outfit that he only wears that in the marketing, but it is.
Dude, don't
perfect.
diss that. I'm still hoping a brand comes out with that in 2021. I'm all over that shit.
I'm not dissing it. I'm just describing it. I love it. I honestly, I saw somebody pull off a cosplay of it, and I'm like, I wonder if I can pull it off myself.
I also like the poster where he's sans protective dome on his head. He's just shooting up in space with the delicious.
Perfect.
Delicious.
I love those. Delicious. Give the people what they want.
Oh yeah, and I Moonraker did. Another thing. I know we need to get ahead here, but the trailer starts. It was so funny watching that trailer last night. It opens with space and a shuttle. I believe one of the Moonraker shuttles sort of coming towards camera, and most promise the moon, but we deliver. And I was like, wait a minute, you don't deliver the moon, but then the word moon extends to Moonraker. So I was like, you got me.
Well played, sir. Well played.
Anything else about the Moonraker campaign?
No.
All right.
I love the effects. Honestly, it's not, but I just love the effects on that movie. And shout out to the people who worked on it, because the process that they used to make the effects, it's ridiculous. It's all in-camera effects. It's
amazing.
I was rewatching the documentaries yesterday, and then it's nightmare-inducing. Like 96 passes in the camera.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Absolutely insane. But the money, as we like to say, I think we did our presentation at the Montreal Comic Con. At this point, it would be 2 summers ago. It would have to have been, where one of the movies we talked about was Moonraker. I think I did the Moonraker presentation, or that section of the presentation, and yeah, one of the things we brought up was that, say what you will about Jaws going from a goodie to a baddie, and whatever, Dolly and this and that, you cannot say the money's not on the screen when you watch that movie. It's definitely on the screen.
Oh, totally. It shows. It's robust.
Oh, Roger. What is this? There's a note in my book. Oh, no. Who else could it be other than the nefarious M. White? Do we have people everywhere? We do have people everywhere. But just before we get to that, we want to thank our viewers. Of course, we want to thank our listeners if you're listening to the podcast, but our viewers, if you've made it to the YouTube channel, thank you so much. This is the conclusion to part 1 of our discussion with David Zaritsky of the Bond Experience. We've been talking, of course, about the marketing of the Bond brand. We're going to continue this next week. We went on for a while, so we figured probably need to cut this into 2 parts, as opposed to just giving you this in one single marathon. So this will continue next week. We, the James Bond Complex, can indeed be found everywhere. www.thejamesbondcomplex.com. We're on Twitter at The Bond Complex, Instagram at The James Bond Complex, Facebook, The James Bond Complex. We're hosted at anchor.fm. We continue to thank them for their gratuitous services. And of course, you can listen to us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, my old friends at Apple. Search for the James Bond Complex, subscribe, write a review, and leave us a 5-star glowing golden gun review. David Zaritsky, of course, can be found on Instagram, first of all, at The Bond Experience, but most notably, his own YouTube channel. I'm sure you guys know about it, but just in case, search for The Bond Experience, subscribe, and enjoy. It's very good content, especially when it's about the marketing of James Bond. So we're going to continue this next week. Just as James Bond always returns, so too will the James Bond Complex. Sur ce, merci. Toujours un plaisir, à la prochaine. Thank you so much. See you next time. Arigato matane. Hasta la próxima. And daum Jue Boget Samnida. Ciao, belli.
There's something very special about the taste of 7-Up that's unlike any other soft drink. Maybe because 7-Up has no artificial flavor and no artificial color. Never had it, never will. And no caffeine. Never had it, never will. Whatever it is that makes 7-Up so refreshingly different than other soft drinks, never had it, never will.